Okay, welcome back everybody for the final session of the day. Great to see so many of you here still with us in the room. I see this session in many ways as probably going to pull together a lot of the strands that we've heard throughout the day, but it's very much focused on unlocking insight from data to support decision making. So it's all about, I think, looking back to those challenges and those ambitions that Simon Case set out at the beginning of the day is how do policymakers, people working on developing policy, how do they get the insights from that data to help them in their thinking about policy development and to improve that policy making process. We really do have another fantastic panel. We've had great panels throughout the day. We've got a spectacular panel here for our final session. As I say, I don't want anyone leaving the room today thinking, I really wish I could have asked that question. So if there's any question at all that you haven't felt you've had the right moment to ask it, so if it comes up in the conversation or if there's anything else now, this session is your moment to ask that question. I'm going to introduce our speakers, I'm going to invite them to speak, and then we will get into conversation and questions. So we have Kamal Bal here, who is Director of Digital at the Ministry of Justice. Then we have Sean Heshmat, who is Head of Data and AI at the Global Growth Markets for Cognizant, one of our knowledge partners today. We've got Alex Longden, who is Head of Data Strategy and Standards at the Ordnance Survey. Emma Gordon, who is Director of ADR at the United Kingdom Economic and Social Research Council, the SRC. And we've got Albert King, who is Chief Data Officer, Digital and Security at the NHS National Services Scotland. So it was great we had Tim earlier. We've now got you here with us. So it'll be interesting maybe to do some comparisons as well, Albert. Kamal, I'm going to come to you straight away for your opening remarks.
I'm actually slightly worried I'm on the wrong panel. I maybe should have been on the previous one. So I'm only 6 months into my civil service and Ministry of Justice career. So I've spent most of my life in the private sector. And first and foremost, I'm a customer experience enthusiast. That's where my real passion lies. The digital element comes because in recent years, it's through digital mechanisms that we're able to offer these brilliant experiences. And I think it makes me really attuned to when I have experiences myself. And I think of some of the, possibly we've probably all been through this, one of the worst experiences I can ever think of is when I interact with a company, a brand, particularly when something's gone wrong, and I have to, at that point, you resort to calling them. And when you call them and it then doesn't get resolved, and then you call them back, and you basically have to regurgitate your entire story to them again, and then you have to call them a third time, and again you regurgitate, and you sit there thinking, wow, this is a single brand with one channel. How can they get this so wrong? And then you start to blow it out. I had the great fortune of working at Marks & Spencer. And it was in the early days when online was really just starting up. And it was at this point, the store systems and the world of the offline store was very different to the online world. But we saw through that. We had a visionary leader in Laura Way-Geary at the time who very early saw through that. And we started to do a lot of work like the loyalty scheme, the Sparks loyalty scheme, if anyone is, helped to start to connect data across our customers so we knew more about the customer. We did work in our supply chain, so actually we could take store inventory and present it on the website to better enhance a click and collect service rather than shipping products up and down the country and cost us a fortune. We could take it from store inventory. But why am I talking about this? If I was asked us to think, what is probably the biggest, most well-known brand in the UK that has a deeply complicated back system behind it? We're probably people are thinking the classic Apple and Google and Tesco, but I would proffer that it's His Majesty's government, because to many of our fellow people in society, when they interact with us, they believe they've been interacted with us as a whole. You hear that, well, I gave you that information when I registered for Universal Credit the other week. I gave you that information when I registered for my driving license. I gave you that information when I submitted my tax return. And I think it creates great complexity for many of our, fellow citizens or the people in society. They feel like they've interacted with us, and therefore it's a pain for them when we keep asking them for the same things. It's something that was talked about just previously. Coming to the topic today, using data and insight to drive decision making. In my world, we go from small to big. Small might be just simple, dedicated digital experiences, looking at things like Google Analytic data, looking at insight from user research to understand where have we got problems, where do we need to make changes. Then doing, forgive me if you noticed it, but multivariate testing. I can put the same group of customers, I can put 4 different versions live to them at the same time and remove all other variables and start to get a sense of what is the best thing with that. We start to scale it out. We do some really good work. We've got our legal aid agency right now they have a direct integration with HMRC, for example, so we can, rather than asking someone a specific question, we can use the data submitted to validate back to HMRC and say, does this person actually, do we think that what they submitted is what they earned? Does that hang true with what we've got? And then the bigger picture stuff, I think someone asked in the previous session about, experiences, and, for me, if I think about something like criminal injuries is one of my agencies, and if you think about what happened today, someone is unfortunately the victim of, assault, criminal injury, whatever. They're living with that trauma. They then go and report it to the police, and they have to relive the trauma again as they go to the police. Someone may signpost them and say, oh, by the way, there's a compensation scheme that you could potentially go through. They have to apply again, and we relive the trauma a third time. And then probably in that case, in that process, there's more questions come out, and they relive the trauma for a fourth time. And I've got this magical, rainbows and unicorn world whereby, well, what if when that happened, they lived the trauma and they reported to the police? Yes, it needs an input, but from that point, what if we could then easily see the police records? What if we could go and see their NHS records and match up and say, yes, there was a broken cheekbone and a fractured collarbone, and then we could use our own skills. Then we could go and look up to HMRC or DWP and say, and now we know their bank details. And what actually happens is, a month later, you get a notification that says, we're really sorry to hear what happened, but by the way, there's £1,000 in your bank account. What a different experience for our fellow citizens, our fellow humans, to put them through that rather than make them relive trauma. So that's my aspiration, is to be able to use data to really drive much better experiences for people. One of my big goals, and I look to anyone who's in policy or law, and particularly in those central functions, I never want one of my teams to have to sign a data sharing agreement with another department. Maybe it's impossible to bite off, but that should be a goal. Again, it was talked on in the last session, but how can we ensure that when someone shares their data, we're sharing it with His Majesty's government such that we can use it to benefit them?
Brilliant. Thanks, Kamal. I said it would cover quite a lot of the themes that have come out today, and I think you just demonstrated that, because your ambition there to have that kind of seamless policy-making process, that seamless customer experience as well, I think requires so many of those things we've talked about, breaking down those barriers, trust in the citizen, the right legislative framework in place, all of those things. So maybe we'll come into how do we achieve all of that. And really interesting, I've got a Marks and Sparks card, Sparks card, but I think you never think when you're using that, you're giving over your data that's then going to be used behind the scenes in all these ways. It just doesn't, it's a different kind of interaction, definitely. I think, so really interesting. Thanks, Kamal. Sean, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, great to be kind of in the last panelist, because we got a chance to hear amazing conversations before, so really enjoyed that. I guess I've been part of this process of sharing data within the government departments for about 7 years. I remember doing my first event in Whitehall, and I'm very positive about the progress that's been made since that time. I heard a lot today about simple things. Joined up government needs joined up data. That is a fact, and that was I think Ms. Pritchard said that initially. We talked a little bit about also some of the things that we're trying to do departmentally in terms of creating communities and making data sharing communities and policy communities. That's a very, very important aspect of actually beginning to have the culture of sharing. We talked a little bit about the data marketplace in the beginning, which is something I'm going to come back to in a bit. That's a very great progress toward recognizing that we need to industrialize and scale this up. And there was also a lot of great conversations about using some of for example, Dominic, he was talking about, well, banking does this already. They share millions of banking transactions already. That's very good, because now we're thinking that maybe some aspects of the private sector may apply within a reason, within some constraints. Also, somebody else talked about the life sciences and how drug manufacturers also do this. Now, the concept of data sharing is actually, we do it in pockets really well. So for example, I'm not sure how many of you live in London, but during COVID, we were continuously monitoring the water to make sure that we see the uptake of the virus. And we were able to figure out whether the numbers are going up or down. Post-COVID, for those of you living in London again, we found incidents of polio, which really initiated a lot of action from the local health communities to really make sure that all the children of that age are vaccinated for this really dangerous disease. So we do certain things well. The question then becomes, how do we scale it up? And I come back to the point where, again, we talked about this data marketplace. Data marketplace are really a great tool that we will use for discovering data sources that we can augment with our own department's data to make better decisions and better recommendations to the ministers. But that requires a lot of work, a lot of standardization, a lot of incentivization. And that's something that I feel now the focus really needs to go more on that, more on how we can do this, both foundationally and also from a change management perspective. Foundationally, it's not rocket science, but we need to do it. What do we need to do? We need to have better data cataloging capabilities across that is visible, because the only way that we can explore the different data sets that we have in different departments using this marketplace, we need to have better cataloging capabilities so we can discover these data sets, so we can explore these data sets, and we can figure out which attributes of these data sets can be married to our attributes. We need to be able to obviously work very hard in making sure that the researchers who are accessing that data are obviously, verified and they're using it for the right reasons. That is fundamentally a journey that we need to make, and that probably needs to be navigated a little bit more on the sort of hierarchy level, because departments will do what they can, but obviously with all the budget constraints, you cannot do everything. So the standardization, the harmonization, the incentivization needs to happen there. And then I come back to Kamal's point, which I totally agree with, and I think has also been echoed by a couple of the panelists. One is, how do we excite our citizens and non-citizens who consume the government services to share their data, and how do we give them the trust back that we're actually using it for the explicit purpose that they give it back to us? I think the experience bit is critical, and I fully agree with Kamal, but I think also the engagement with our stakeholders in the communities that we serve need to be a little bit better, because we need to show them the benefits of this. Just as an example, I live in Westminster, and I'm a bit of a buff in terms of the planning. And every time I have to navigate through the Westminster Planning website, sorry if anybody from Westminster Council is here, it's not that easy. And I've been living in the same property for the last 28 years. It's not that hard to know what I'm interested in. It's not that hard to see that I'm quite vocal and active in some of the planning decisions in my council, but it's not easy. So marrying the experience bit that Kamal has said with also a foundational capability that can expose that data to that council with my consent makes my interaction with the council or even with the wider government department that much easier. So that's really what I'm looking forward to taking forward out of this.
Thanks, Sean. Lots in there to unpick again. So, as you say, some good things happening, some pockets of good practice in terms of data sharing, but now the challenge is how do we scale that up? Things like the data marketplace are going to be really helpful, but if you don't know what data's there, if you don't know what's available, then it's really hard. I think somebody mentioned at the beginning the importance of making it easier for civil servants to discover the data that's going to be useful for them, so they can then augment it with their own departmental data as well. And coming back again, this has come out of all of the sessions, this importance of building trust, I think, with the public, if we want the public to give us permission to share their data and link their data in different ways. Thanks, Sean. Alex, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I just want to give a bit of an update in terms of the work that we've been undertaking in terms of improving our data to allow our government customers leverage the value of geospatial data, and a little bit of history about OS. So we've got a long history starting in the late 1700s, supporting the military, hence the name Ordnance, and we've gone on to make notable contributions to the advancement of geospatial and being one of the world leaders in terms of geospatial across the globe. We're a founding member of the Open Geospatial Consortium and one of the 6 partners. And some of the notable contributions we've made are like the triangulation of the UK landmass, and then the retriangulation in the 1930s. So it's a bit boring, but I found it quite interesting. And just to let you know, whenever you see that trig pillar that you might come across when you're in the countryside on a walk. And we've, one of the first countries in the world to complete the electronic mapping of the UK. So what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of history, and there's a lot of history represented in our data, which has limited use for data analytics. So we've undertaken a large program of change to tackle that. And we're implementing the biggest step change in a generation Ordnance survey in terms of how we capture, store, and make available our data to support analytically ready data. This has all been underpinned through the work with and our partnership with the Geospatial Commission. They own the public sector geospatial agreement called the PSGA. They sit within DSIT, and the delivery of that contract has been transformational for Ordnance Survey and our customers, which range across from the blue light community to land registration, to the NHS, and to many government departments who use foundational data as one of the foundational data assets they utilise and then build their data infrastructure from. So the delivery of the PSGA has led to some substantial volumes of data being made available for use. So the National Geospatial Database has over 500 million features in it. It's updated 20,000 times a day. So for that, we use some really clever infrastructure. We've deployed on the public cloud, and that has necessitated the use and the addition of new skills to OS. So we've grown the number of data professionals quite significantly. We've increased the number of data architects, data engineers, data management specialists in OS, and also recognizing that industry doesn't have enough data professionals. We do try to grow our own, so we have the OS Data Academy, which is available to professionals in OS and also people outside OS who want to change career. So we have a accredited training scheme and also a program where people rotate through the department, learning new skills, and we then have brought in career pathways. So there's like a landing zone after you completed the academy, as well as like a landing zone for our graduates. So we have new roles so they can start a career in data OS. And we also have professionals conded out, data management professionals from OS, conded out supporting government agencies, departments. For example, we've got somebody in the VOA now who's helping them, upskill their geo expertise. And we're also working with ONS in terms of their data science campus, created a geo bespoke training module for them, which is training over 500 data scientists. So in terms of where we are, OS is heavily investing in the transformation of our data, making it more analytically ready. We're upskilling our staff and our colleagues in government agencies to ensure that they can unlock the value of geodata in their, to solve their business problems.
Brilliant, thank you. And again, that picks up a lot of what we're talking about. So it's how do you use historical data, making it relevant and accessible for policymakers today. You wouldn't necessarily think of the Ordnance Survey data being so useful to such a broad range of departments. But as you mentioned, everything from NHS to emergency services to land registry, you've got all this valuable data that if you can link it up with other data sets can give really good insights. And then also, I think one of our early sessions, we were talking about the composition of people. And you've said there that you've had to rethink bringing in people with different skills to be able to do a lot of this stuff. Thanks a lot, Alex. Really interesting. Emma, over to you.
Thanks very much. And I had a couple of slides. Have you got those? Yeah, if you go to the next one. So, I'm Emma Gordon. I lead the ADI UK programme at ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council. And these are the organisations that are involved in this partnership. So we bring government partners together with academic partners to unlock administrative data for research. And the power of administrative data, using that data in research, it goes up exponentially when you link that data. And this is all done in, de-identify the data, and the access is only through trusted research environments, one in each of the 4 UK nations. But the reason why I'm doing this job, I started off as an academic researcher. I then went into ONS, and I was the custodian of all the health data that ONS has. I then moved to Treasury in a job that was very cross-cutting across the whole of government, and all the time hearing these discussions about how hard it is to share data. And the academic community assumes that everyone in the civil service has wonderful access to data, and it's just that they won't let them have access. I knew it wasn't like that. So when ESRC set up this programme that is funded by government, it's funded through DSET and through UKRI, to unlock the power of administrative data for research. That's the job I wanted to do, because I knew that to change the outcome, to make this better for everyone, we had to change the system. So the programme I lead supports government departments by giving them funding to make that data available, and we've done some fantastic work with MOJ in particular to do this, but as well DFE, DWP, HMRC, whole range of government departments. And my argument, and the next slide will show this in a very, very noddy way. This is what I was drawing last night on the slide. But basically, the civil service is faced with making sense of ever more complex sets of data. I only work with administrative data. There's all of these other data sources that you're expected to make sense of for decision making. You cannot possibly do that on your own. So that by bringing together the partnerships with academics, and the incentives work for this, academics are incentivized to become experts throughout their career in specific areas. Civil servants, on the other hand, and I used to be one, are incentivized to become an expert in one thing and then very quickly move on to the next thing. And as soon as you've built up that expertise, you're getting that rising sense of panic that you need to bank that experience and move on to the next thing so that you can land a promotion. It's very, very different in academia, but the two sides working together collaboratively, that's how we can collectively unlock those insights for policy-making decisions.
Brilliant, thank you. I like what you said there, that the power in administrative data comes in linking it, in the linking of those data sets. But also your plea there, and I'd be interested in what the audience think about that, is don't try and do this on your own.
Yeah.
So collaborate with people in particular in academia who have the expertise, the resource, the time
Yes.
to do this kind of work.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emma. Albert, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, folks. Great to be here. I'm really interested in this idea that this is the panel that you can just throw any questions at the end of the day.
I didn't tell them this in advance, so yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see where that takes us. So I guess, unlocking insight from data in the NHS, that's about better decision making so that we can save time, so that we can deploy our resources more efficiently, but I guess most importantly so that we can save lives, right? And to do that, I think that it's all about how we empower decision makers, not just with timely insights, but actually empower them to get their own insights and really democratize access to insight. And I think the key thing about how we do that, in turn, is essentially how we provide an environment in which they're able to do that, they're empowered to do that. And that is partly about getting the tools and technology right, and others have talked about the importance of being able to discover data and trying to make that an easier thing to do. And I love the conversation earlier about ambient data collection, because doing that in a more ambient way so that it's a less arduous task for those of us who work in data, I think is a big enabler, making sure we've got obviously the right analytical tools so that people can get that insight. But also thinking about getting the data right and actually investing in data as an asset and with all that implies. But also getting the governance culture, skills and incentives right. We talked all about data sharing, and actually people aren't necessarily incentivized to share data. They're incentivized that the things that really affect people are the risks and the controls, and the incentives to share data often don't accrue to the people who actually own the data. So I think it's about how we empower our workforce, democratize data and insight, and it's not just about data professionals. So that data curious culture that we need to develop and cultivate, supported by those data assets that are well described, that are visible and available, and data professionals who actually see their role as empowering and enabling others, as well as bringing that kind of deep expertise when that's necessary to address some of the most challenging and tricky questions. So that democratized, federated model in which data, policy, and subject matter experts work in collaboratives. And there's a couple of examples I thought I'd give in this space. So One is around the near-time data service that we're building that is there creating well-described data assets to support insight and decision-making across the health and social care economy in Scotland. And it's taking very much that sort of asset-based approach, bringing together timely, near-time data assets and services that support sort of real-time MI and insight, where timeliness is a key dimension of quality, but then as we develop and invest and improve the quality of those assets, they support things like benchmarking and statistics, and they pass through into the kind of research ecosystem, all the while making sure that that's well described, the lineage is well understood so that people understand how, what appropriate uses those data can be used for. So I think that's a really good example of how we can empower people with better data quality services. And the other one I was going to draw on was the UNICEF Data for Children Collaborative that we set up, which is all about solving challenges that face children globally. So that's something that I hope that we can all really buy into, right? And so questions like how we tackle food insecurity and actually decomposing that question into, or that challenge into questions that are amenable to be solving by data, that in and of itself is a problem, right? So they really actually had to invest in developing a methodology to do that, a repeatable methodology to do that, that was all about bringing together not just those data folks, those domain expertise from academia and policy, but also those policy expertise, so that we can really well define the question, understand the question, and then decompose it and bring the right expertise together to solve that. And I think that's a great example of that deep data expertise and SME expertise all coming together to unlock insight from data.
Brilliant, thank you. So again, stressing collaboration, this time not only just with academics, but as you're saying, collaborate across professions to make sure that policymakers, decision makers have the data professionals in the room as well, work on these things together. And this hasn't come up as much as I thought it would today, but what you said there at the end about really making sure you know the question that you're asking before you look to the data. And I think we might be getting ourselves, there's a risk we might be getting ourselves into the situation where we've got so much data, we're doing it the other way round almost. So I think it's quite important to remember what it is you're trying to achieve, what the outcome is you want. Thank you so much, all of you, for great, again, opening remarks. I want to start actually with something that you said there, which was about incentivizing people to share data, because this has come up in lots of sessions, and I think it's been thrown out there as the incentives aren't there, the incentives are wrong, people aren't incentivized to share data. So I want to put to you very simply, what would it look like if the incentives were there? What would be different?
Yeah, so I guess my sort of caricature of the current situation is that if you're somebody entering data or collecting data or gathering data, and somebody invites you to share it for academic research or for other purposes, typically what you do is you look at that and you ask yourself questions about the risks that are going to fall to you if you share that data, right? So it's all about a risk equation. And I think the key for me is trying to make sure that we think about what are the benefits that might exist throughout the kind of data value chain from people who are entering data. And we were hearing about clinicians earlier today who are burdened by, I think it was 50% of their time spent collating case notes and these sorts of things. And so the cost and the risk around all of that is all, the burden of all of that is accruing to the people who are gathering the data, and not necessarily the benefits. But if we flip that model and we are able to move to, for example, ambient documentation, I love that phrase, we're able to shift that kind of ambient documentation model, then actually that's enabled by data-driven technologies, right? And that's enabled by more effective use of data and digital. And then further downstream, they're able to get better quality, say clinical insights about the people who are sitting in front of them, as well as better academic research that informs clinical practice. So I think it's that, and I think it's about connecting those benefits more directly and more viscerally for those who are collecting data or involved in the stewardship of data.
Thanks. Sean, you're nodding there. Just your thought on, are the incentives wrong, and how do you agree with what we've just heard?
I was agreeing 100%. I mean, I think when we talk about incentivization, I think we also need to understand the kind of type of data that we need to incentivize people to share. Obviously, in the structured data, we're able to have a lot more focus in terms of getting the appropriate fields, appropriate attributes. It's slightly different and slightly more risky when you're sharing things that are in a PDF file that may have identifiable information. So I do think that is really something that with the enhanced focus on communities and enhanced focus on actually sharing common standards of, for example, when you have PDFs that you think about sharing and your incentivization is there to share, you probably need to make sure that it is fairly anonymized, so there's nothing that can expose a person to that data being stored and being held against them. Again, that engenders trust, so a lot of the incentivization has to be about sharing the type of data, having the right policies about what type of data you share in which context, and then making sure that obviously at no given time, data is not shared about people that they have not given you consent. I think if we're able to make that model work, I think we're going to have a lot more, I would say a lot more, an explosion of things to be used for good, as long as we have those sort of guardrails, and incentivizations really need to follow that.
Thanks. I've got another question that I want to put to Kamal, but does anyone want to come in on incentives before I...
Maybe not. I mean, I think the flip side is like how is it that we incentivize, and what is it we're... And this isn't new. Anyone's read Inside the Nudge Unit by David Halpern, for example, we're doing it. But how can we nudge and deliberately use friction as well to create that incentive for people to do? So how do we say to someone, great, if you go down this route, the digital route, it will be done in minutes or days, and if you choose to go down this route, which is, it's going to be weeks and months to get the same thing. I think there's a lot of things we can, again, come back to, we can try many things in a digital platform these days. We can try both at the same time and see what do people tend to do. So I think it probably comes down to what is it we mean by incentivizing, and I think there's ways to nudge people in the right way. I think there's ways to incentivize, especially these days with time.
Yeah.
Is a great example.
Emma, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think for us, the incentives were that there's a huge cost burden for any single government department taking on responsibility for sorting out data. So the Data First programme that we fund in Ministry of Justice, they came to us saying, we'd love to share data with academic researchers, but we can't make sense of it ourselves. So they had over 50 different administrative streams of data coming in from across the court services, criminal courts, crime courts, magistrates courts, prison services, the whole lot. They didn't know which was duplicate data, where the gaps were. There were no unique identifiers, and they said, if you pay us to sort this out, we'll gladly give access to that data in a secure environment for research purposes. And then the incentives are suddenly there for us to get involved, because if it's just the benefits would result in a single team within Ministry of Justice having brilliant access to the data, the economics of that are never going to add up. But if you can then take those data sets and make them available to a huge number of researchers for policy relevant research, then suddenly the incentives are there, and the economics of funding that do make sense.
Alex, before I move on then, is that what you're finding, that as you're making the data more accessible and more relevant, then it kind of becomes easier? I mean, it's a bit of common sense, isn't it? But are you finding that people were wanting that data, and now that you've made it more easily available, they're being able to use it? And so you're kind of, like you say, you're nudging, there's a nudge there, because you're just making it easier.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're also updating more in real time. So we're conducting more surveys, more aerial photographs. So our customers then are aware that our data is more up to date. It's the latest information, and they're just querying what they require, maybe rather than pulling down a larger, polygon, etc. So absolutely, and so that's putting an emphasis on quality, and an emphasis on our data testing, and ensuring there's consistency across our data testing. Everything from upstream in terms of data capture to the right-hand side in terms of then those end products, how they go out to customers. Are they meeting the specification? And sort of bringing that improvement and that collaboration, it turns into a team sport across the organisation. We've all got a vested interest in making sure that the highest quality, the best data is made available.
Thanks. So my final question before I come to all of you in the audience, Kamal, you said something which got me interested, which was this sense of delivering services in different ways, so kind of testing different ways of delivering a digital service. and then using the data that you get to see kind of which one worked best. Is that something you're already doing in MOJ? I'm just thinking of the reality of that for people in other policy areas
No,
where they're testing different things.
We absolutely do in various spaces. We can, as I say, it's so simple to create 3 different interpretations on the front that you expose to someone in the public or even a colleague. We quite often do it with colleague-facing things because, again, we've got a reasonably big audience that come and do it. But it's not an experience from the civil service, but one of my favourite experiences with this was in my time at M&S again, where there was something we were trying to validate. Would people pay for a same-day collection service from store? And we came up with this concept. We said, basically, we used the website, and we said, right, what we're going to do is just put a little widget on the date planner, and we'll pop this thing up that says you can choose today. And we ran a test where we were going to charge, I think it was like £3, £1, and do it for free. And because, first we'd asked a bunch of people in store, and they were like, oh yeah, we'd absolutely pay for that. And then we asked them anonymously, and everyone said, good God, I'd never pay for that. So we thought, well, let's actually prove it out. And I mean, when we told the PR team what we were going to do, they went apoplectic, and they were like, we're Marks and Spencer, you can't possibly lie to our customers. And I had to engage them and just talk about this is how people do things. And we ran this test for 2 weeks, 20,000 people engaged with it. And all we did is when someone selected today, we just popped up a message and said, oh, we're really sorry, all the slots are full in your store, please choose tomorrow. And all these people did it, and at the end of it, we then came up, someone referenced business cases. We came up with a tangible business case that said, based on 20,000 people experiencing this, here is the true value of what someone would pay for a same-day collection service. Gone are the days of hypothetical business case. If I, stand on the corner of a stage and stick my finger in the air and the wind's blowing east, it will deliver 5 million. We could go back with tangible numbers because we had proof from the
But
data
that's why I think one of the issues that has come up today is like how risk-averse civil servants might be, or not risk-averse maybe, but how they approach risk differently. And just would you get pushback maybe from officials, maybe ministers, if you say we're going to test this in 4 different ways?
We will, but it's an interesting, and look, people can always ask different elements of the ethics of how ethical is it doing. I would argue that is more ethical than me throwing away the taxpayers' money on something I've got no absolute proof it's going to have value. Why should I go and spend £100,000 doing something on a bit of a whim and a prayer that it's going to come off when actually I can spend £5,000 doing something
It's kind of the
quickly.
other side of where we were saying you need to get better at measuring the impact post-delivery.
I want to know the impact before I even go forward with it.
Yeah, okay. Great, thank you. Right, we're coming over to the audience. Who would like to ask the first question? Let me see. So I've said we could, there's a gentleman over there in a white shirt. And do we have another question? Yeah, right at the back row, and then I'll come to you on the next one, okay?
Thank you. So I'm an ex-public servant and I work in the private sector, but I definitely experience that risk-averse attitude to doing things, and I take the point about incentives as well. I think a lot of the answer that the public service and civil servants have come up with to answer that sort of risk-averse question is to do the value chain stuff and to think ahead about what the benefits could be before you even start to prove it, before you even begin. But if you look at how the private sector behaves, it collects the data well in advance, uses it 5-10 years later maybe in an unsupervised learning model on a bunch of data they thought was never going to be useful in the first place. So how do you reconcile that let's come up with the value before we even begin versus actually let's collect data today that could be useful, but actually we accept that we don't know how it's useful at the moment?
Okay, so good question. And do we have the same resources? So can we collect data that we don't even know yet the value of it? So that's the first question. And then question at the back.
Hello, hi all. My name is Chris from Department of Work and Pensions. Safe to say, like a recurring theme of today has been the difficulty of government departments directly sharing data with each other. I was wondering if any of your organisations had done any thinking about the potential of like digital certificates of some form in allowing users to be the bridge in sharing data between departments. So having cryptographically verifiable data provided by one department that a user then chooses to share with others. An example being proof of COVID vaccinations. Could we do that with proving you're getting benefits or proving that you're a care leaver?
Thank you. So digital certificates, so the user giving permission almost without the departments themselves having to give permission. Okay, so you can answer one or both of those questions. So it's about gathering data in advance, and then could we have some way of users saying they allow the data to be shared. I am going to shake up the order a little bit. Let's go this direction. Albert, we'll start with you.
Awesome. So, I mean, I guess, I'm not sure I agree, by the way, having worked in the private sector for a number of years, I'm not sure I agree that industry collects data sort of prospectively just because it has a bit of a hunch that it might be useful. Personally, I think that in that sense, the private sector or industry and the public sector are kind of in the same place, that we collect data when we think it has utility. And that doesn't mean being really kind of super prescriptive about, wanting to know exactly, the answer to one specific question. It means collecting data sets, things like, you think about things like census, and you think about things like, the pupil census, or you think about things about disease registers. You think about these are data assets which we're able to combine and bring together as we need to answer questions in a flexible way. And I think that's why I'm advocating this kind of data asset-based approach, where we understand and think about those data assets, and we're able to discover them across actually our whole ecosystem, and then bring them together as we need to, and the specific items we need to ask and answer questions. I think things like, if I understood the question correctly, things like sort of digital wallets that enable people to share data and attributes, in a flexible way, and citizens being in control of that, are very, very powerful tools. And I know that the Digital Identity Scotland programme is taking an approach very, very like that, and enabling citizens to share attributes with public services and proven attributes, and putting citizens in control. But I don't think it's the only answer. I think we need to be really careful as organisations as well, not to abdicate the responsibility that we have for managing data and being responsible in the way we manage data, all of it to citizens, because we have a responsibility to citizens to do that in a trustworthy way and get value from data.
Thanks, Albert. Emma.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer the digital certificates question. And I have had a lot of conversations about this. And in my world, we talk about, is it the data donation model? I have to say I feel quite uneasy about this, because if we go back to who responds to surveys, it's generally white middle-class people. And the power of data to inform...
Oh, sorry, Emma, your mic.
The power of data to inform decision-making is only going to work if that data that's underpinning the service design or policy design represents all of society. So if we ended up in a situation where it's only discrete members of, groups in the population that were represented in that data, that's going to end up with some really bad decisions being made, I think.
You might get the
nice concept, but yeah.
A widening digital exclusion as well.
Yeah.
Thanks. Alex.
So in terms of the second question, which I took more around sharing data, so what's quite interesting at Ordnance Survey for us is that we have traditionally been the custodians of all our data. We'd even create the rail network and represent it. But actually, with government departments hiring more geo and data professionals, they are now the expert of that data asset. And so what we're looking towards encouraging and creating is more of an aggregator model, where we help organisations, government departments, locate their data in one place. Doesn't mean you have to move that data, but you can share that data. So you can share that through RESTful APIs or browser-enabled APIs based on common standards to deliver that interoperability. And we could go on, in terms of then the end goal of maybe the end goal will be supporting large language models query our data and others' data through an aggregated model. In terms of then the first question, in terms of gathering data in advance, that's one of the tricks of Ordnance Survey. We have to be ahead of customer demand. We can't always wait for customer requirements to come in. So we have a project at the moment looking at the future of large-scale data, anticipating, what will the future transport network look like? How interconnected will it be? What nodes do we need in place? climate resilience, looking at emissions of buildings. That requires more detail about that building, you know, the construct of that building, you know, its materials used, the number of floors in a building. And in terms of OS achieving that data on our own, we can't necessarily do that. And we have that partnership with the Valuation Office who actually hold a lot of that data. So it enriches, by having that partnership, it enriches our data plus enriches their data so they can have more certainty of the location of a building, for example.
Thanks. Sure.
So I'll take the data sharing one first, and maybe just to focus a little bit on Alex, because you know they gather a lot of the geospatial data. And for example, you know, I agree with him completely. That is one attribute of the data that can be used with others. For example, for Network Rail, what we do with them is we take some of the data from geospatial. We take some of the data. They have something called a banana train. Basically, it's a train that runs all night and then monitors the track conditions. Also, they have 3D imaging of the tracks and the various bollards, etc. And that's how they determine the predictive maintenance program. And I think it saved them something like £30 million already. And they're enriching that data continuously so they can better allocate their maintenance resources for these areas of the tracks that really needs it, rather than just, you know, normally it takes 5 years for me to replace it. So there is an area where, you know, kind of to be controversial, I think even from a public sector perspective, we can provide data as a service. Another thing, for example, insurance companies, when there is a claim, particularly in a place in a rural area, it's expensive for them to send an assessor. There's a lot of capabilities within the government to actually have an anonymized data as a service to track, and this is why it's important to have history of data, to track, for example, an outhouse that was claimed to be in a fire just a month ago. Well, that building was not there a year ago. And so there's a lot of potential revenue generating data that we can put out there by sharing responsibly. And the other thing I want to mention is when we talk about data, everybody keeps thinking it's my data, it's my name, it's my street address, it's my national insurance number. That's one bit of it. That's not the entirety of it all. And that can be easily put through a privacy enhancing technology that anonymizes that bit. So, you know, for me, I think we need to think very deep in terms of what we can share. And because 80% of it, I think, can be shareable, 20% of it can be very much anonymized and can be used for cohorts. For example, the NHS have something called cohort as a service. This is how they decided to target which COVID vaccine goes where, whether the 65-year age is right or wrong, but you know that's an example of putting cohorts together, running some risk assessments, running through how do you get better health outcomes if you only target that group. Again, not a single person was identified, but putting this in a cohort, analyzing it, and coming with policy decisions that provides value for money for the taxpayer, you know, is a really good opportunity for all of us to engage with.
Thanks, Sean. Kamal, I know we've got other questions, but on these
I'll try and answer them both. And I've been thinking about answers, and then I just kind of argue against myself in my own head. It's a bit of a weird thing I do. But on the point about proactive and reactive, I've actually got a slightly different lens, which is I think, I can only use the MOJ and 6 months of experience on this. I think we look at it in different ways. So in the MOJ, we've got the most incredible group of data analysts, data scientists, etc., and they do a lot of work, which is, for me, it's heavily focused on academia and research and what we need to do. We don't, however, invest in what I would call digital performance analysts who are constantly reviewing real-time data of things that's coming in and taking trends and go, wow, actually, we're starting to see a shift and a move in behavior of, in my private world experience, that I've had a plethora of those digital analysts who are more focused on real-time reactions and responding to things that are happening quite quickly, and that's why we've been more able to pivot quickly. So I don't know if it's about necessarily setting up delivery. Maybe it's just a different skill set. That's a skill set that I want to bring more into the MOJ, though, is more of those digital analysts. On the question you asked, Daljit talked earlier about this concept of distributed data ownership. I personally love the concept of it. I just see it as a triple win in terms of, one, the person has got the ownership of saying, am I willing to share or not? Two, that data. I think it's an interesting point you raised before, but good debate here. Is it better to have all of this data in one place where we can just have intense focus on making sure it's secure and it's all wrapped up as it needs to be, or is it actually a good world we've got now where every single department needs to worry about data security and things like that? on the third point then, if that data, again, from an experiential standpoint, if I know I can go and get that data or call that data or check that data to develop a brilliant experience without having to create a data sharing agreement with the department, it's massive for me and what my teams can produce provide, again, to our fellow members of society.
Thanks, Kamal. So I know we had a question over here, and then we've got a question down here. Just going to make everybody run around the room. So Maria, there's one down here if you've got, thanks. If you want to put, thanks.
Hi, hello. Just to almost expand on Emma's point, but also a couple of times has been mentioned about opt-in and consent, or also opt-out consent, especially for consumer data and possibly for the ambient, the passive data collection. Both models will require some level of data literacy for opt-out and opt-in. How do you envision tackling the biases that come out of that, where you've got different varying levels of data literacy, where perhaps a certain cohort of people will opt out because of this level?
Thanks. So that does build on, as you say, on Emma's point. So how do you factor in kind of different understanding, different levels of data literacy when you're asking people to opt in or opt out? And then the question here.
Hi, this is Sharon Moore from IBM. I might have one of those questions that you weren't necessarily expecting. I am a huge fan of being able to deliver insight from data, from joining up. And the next, where my mind went next was round about having many copies and duplicates of data. Wouldn't it be better to have it in one place? We can debate that. From a responsible computing and a sustainability angle, how much are the decisions that are being made round about data taking that into account at this current stage of where we are in maturity in the government in the UK?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch how much are they taking into account?
Sustainability. So if you think about the responsible angle that we should perhaps be taking for computing, then many duplicates of data result in the need to store all that data, and the need to store that data, therefore power, energy,
so literally the
resources,
sustainability,
literal
the green
sustainable
angles
of
sure.
the
So
data
are
implications.
we building up a kind of environmental issue for ourselves in terms of storing all of this data? Got huge amounts of energy required as well to analyse all of this data. Okay, two great questions. That might be the last two that we can get through. Emma, let's start with you because that first one built on your point.
So the opt-in, opt-out issue is a really interesting one, because in the administrative data world, it doesn't really exist. The only place that I think it exists is English health data. So it's very specific. I don't think it exists as a concept even in Scotland or Wales, and it certainly doesn't exist in terms of other forms of administrative data, so education outcomes, DWP benefits, HMRC income data. So the legal basis that we use to underpin everything we do is a permissive legal gateway, the Digital Economy Act, where departments can share de-identified data with researchers. So it can't be used for operational purposes, you can't re-identify it. And by using de-identified data, it kind of, gets around the issues that it's my data is. But we do underpin everything we do with really meaningful public engagement. And even like the Data First programme, how do we open up access to all of this crime and justice data? We've done that by having a panel of organisations and charities that are there to represent both the victims of crime and the perpetrators of crime, to make sure that the uses of that data is underpinned by their experience and their insights. And that to me is really, really important. And we do it in every single different project that we fund. But we have to keep sense checking with the public that what we're doing is a valuable use of that data. And if we go to the sustainability point, we're discussing all of the time how we can rationalise data sharing activities. So in the future, everyone's working towards this model where it's federated querying of data, not multiple copies of data being shared. Because we absolutely know that we have to be responsible about this. And, for every new copy of the data, that's the carbon footprint doubled. we have to be mindful about that moving forward, absolutely.
Thanks. Kamal, I'll come to you next.
I absolutely love the first question, and my honest, transparent answer is I haven't got a clue. But then I would default to what I normally do when I haven't got a clue, which is I would frame a problem statement. I'd set a team off to go and do some research and analysis and try and figure out, what is it that causes people to opt in, opt out? What can we do through testing, through nudging to try and change some of those parameters? You're absolutely right. If we just rely on what's out there, we'll end up with a skewed data set that will potentially drive us down the wrong track. So I think it's a great question. It's a really good challenge for our team. The second one, sustainability, is equally brilliant. I was just talking to someone just yesterday about, I guess what I've always talked about is the fixed costs of digital development. That, once upon a time it was like, well, there's this thing basically, is it performant? Can it work? And then can it work at scale? And is it now secure? And is it accessible? We now have is it now sustainable? Is it ethical? There's all these extra things. My honest answer again to your question is it's an emerging conversation. It's something that has really kicked it for me in the last 6 months. Has become a topic that at least is now getting attention and getting focus. Are we there yet? No. But is it on the table as a conscious point that people now think about? Yes, it is, which is always it's a good first step.
Thanks. I think before there was this assumption a few years ago, everything digital was actually more sustainable, getting rid of paper and everything. But now I think we're reaching that point where we're starting to think actually maybe there is an issue.
But we all jump on we all drink the Kool-Aid, and it's like, everyone get on the cloud.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the cloud is someone else's computer, isn't it? The cloud, these massive centers take a lot of energy to process, support, keep them running, etc. So it's great that, I still believe that the cloud is better than us all run our own data centers and whatnot. But I think now it's great, we're doing that, but how do we now make sure that we're doing it in a more sustainable way?
Thanks. Albert, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think So I think the conversation about questions about sort of opt-in and consent and so on are really, really interesting. And I think, as I was sort of trying to say earlier, I think it's more nuanced than a binary, well, consent is kind of the answer to everything, or we need a sort of, we need to aggregate data all in one place to do, because actually different models are probably fit for purpose for different scenarios, and we need to think really carefully about which ones we apply them in. I think the other thing I think is really interesting in that space is that I often see situations arising where individuals are invited to share some data. It might be a personal data store, for example. Will you share data on your income with, I don't know, Edinburgh City Council so that they can establish your entitlement to a benefit? And you say yes. And so you think you have consented to that data sharing, and you then extend that to, well, that's the basis on which that data is being processed. But actually, typically, a public body won't be, in a legal sense, relying on consent to process that data, right? So conflating these concepts of almost like the act of consenting to share data, and then the legal concepts and the legality and the legal frameworks that sit around it, I think opens us up to all sorts of complexity in how we talk to citizens about this stuff. So, sorry, that's not a very, I'm not offering very many solutions there, but I think there's a lot of complexity and nuance in this, and I don't think there's one model that rules them all, because analytics and research probably demand a different model than, for example, direct service delivery. It's probably where I get to on that. I mean, around the climate stuff, I mean, we're obligated to think about these issues. We're obligated to understand our impact, and I also think that the way we're shifting towards more of a kind of data service-based approach means that, we create fewer copies of data. It's actually more secure as well, and enables us greater control and enables us to make sure people have more timely access to data. But it also does tend to mean that we're storing less data. But do I think we're really mature in understanding how we're the carbon impact of what we're doing in this space? No, not yet. Even if the cloud is quite a nice fluffy blue concept with sort of nice fluffy edges.
It sounds fluffy.
It does, doesn't it?
Sean, your thoughts?
Just about the first question about opting in and opting out. I view it also with the prism of ethics, to be honest with you. The easy answer to say, and I think that was said by one of the earliest panelists, we have a lot more digitally savvy generation that is very happy to share whatever information is asked for them, because that is the mindset that they have. Are they more educated in terms of what they opt in and opt out? Is the data literacy worse? So some of the older people that can read and write and have an understanding of what the data is going to be used for, but somehow, for example, we all know about what happened with Facebook in terms of they were harvesting all this information, socio-demographic information. If you were a historical figure, what would you be? And of course, a lot of people were partaking all of these type of surveys, and the surveys were designed to essentially harvest certain attributes that can be sold on to some actors that maybe have won presidential campaigns or have won other campaigns. So is it really about literacy, or is it about the ethics of actually how we're going to use that data for? And that's something that I think we need to go a little bit beyond a tick box exercise, because I think there's a lot deeper elements that people need to understand. What's it really going to be used for? And then the last point about the ESG, totally agree with Kamal. If you ever seen some of these server farms, they're hectares and hectares and hectares of essentially energy consuming entities, and every time we do a query, it does consume some of that energy. We need to have a lot better education in terms of what is our kind of ESG responsibilities, and not just put it to the AWS and the GCPs of the world. I don't think that discussion is mature or visible enough to most of us yet, because we're not taking agency of those decisions yet. So I think it's a great point.
Thanks, Sean. Alex?
Just in terms of the second question on sustainability, helpfully, one of the, consequences of using the cloud is that you have to be efficient, otherwise it costs a lot of money. And I guess we all have a responsibility in terms of procuring cloud services to make sure and put pressure on them to increase the amount of renewable energy they're using to power the server farms, etc., and cloud assets. And actually the Met Office, where I used to work, I can't remember the percentage, but they mandated quite a high amount of renewable power that's required for a new supercomputer, which is outputting petabytes of data per day. So there is encouraging signs, but it does require pressure from all of us.
Brilliant, thank you. We have 2 minutes left. Does anyone have a burning question that they would? Yes, there is a hand up here. This will be the final question, so no pressure. It just has to be the best question of the whole day. So, gentleman down here, if you could put your hand up again, that's it, and then we'll get the microphone to you. Thank you.
Testing, and there we go. For me, the insight from data, I would say what's been missing today is a little bit on user experience, and asking the user, did you get what you want? Could you find it quickly? And what I found was the theme was that we either agreed that the systems were difficult to navigate and we send people down rabbit holes and they can't find what they want, or we think we're giving them all the data that they want. But there's part of me that thinks, why aren't we checking that? Why aren't we reassuring ourselves that every time we do put out lots of data, that actually the customer experience, they did get the insight, or they did find what they wanted, or we got something back from that too. And so for me, the solution side of things seems to be, we seem to be missing the user experience. So that's sort of my point in question.
Okay. We did have some sessions on kind of the user experience and the customer experience, but just very quickly, because it is the final thing, any thoughts, 2 seconds each, on how we can kind of improve that user experience, or get the data to know if what we're doing is
I mean, it's great, because one of the first things I say to all my team, what is the outcome you're seeking and how are you going to measure it? And that's where we always start from, and that then includes, because a lot of them will talk about, we'll give a better customer experience. Great, how are we going to measure? And so you can infer things, again, through, we see an increased number of people who are able to complete a particular challenge. You can assume they've achieved what they want, or then we specifically then follow up with surveys and questionnaires to understand, have you achieved what you sort of, I think you'll see many sites now, will they achieve, the minute you finish, it pops up and says, did you manage to achieve what you came here to do today? That's, we try to follow both of those.
Thanks, well, Sean.
I mean, for me, the concept of episodic memory kind of comes to my mind, because on the weekends when I log on to the kind of Amazon website or whatever website, kind of remembers what I've done. It kind of recommends certain things. Obviously, there's a bit of consent going on, and when I compare it to what I do during the work week with my day-to-day job and the kind of, the systems I use, there's no such thing. I am brand new. So part of the experience is also remembering what have you done, and kind of try to capture your interest and kind of the propensity for you to want certain data or certain recommendations so you can do it. I think we're slightly far behind because we're still looking at that sort of glossy front end, but we need to get a lot better at kind of remembering and getting the consent for remembering some of these interactions, so the next one would be better, and we learn from that, and we give the user proper experience, good experience.
Thanks. Alex?
It's everything we do. We're measured and contracted in terms of our customer experience. You know, we have teams in-house assisting our customers be onboarded and utilize geospatial data.
Yeah, so user experience for us is...
you might want to use your...
Can researchers get access to the data they need in a timely way? And there's a tension there, because I think the culture before with government data owners was keep putting roadblocks up, and if they're prepared to keep going for years, then they might get access to the data. And our challenge to data owners and trusted research environments is how can you maintain the security controls around the data, but smooth that researcher journey and actually help them to get access to the data so that policy relevant research can come out of it.
Thanks. And final word to you, Albert.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we always look at sort of metrics, quantitative and qualitative metrics on all the kind of information products we provide. It's, as I said, part of our practice. I think what it doesn't really help us get at is whether, answering the question about whether the model is even the right one. We tend to produce data products. Is that even the right model to get people the service they need? So something for me to reflect on. Thank you.
And thank you. It's great to end on that question, because even though the session was kind of broadly about policy making, it's good to bring it back to, is what we're doing actually the right thing for the user? Thank you again. That's the end of our final session. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to Kamal, to Sean, to Alex, to Emma, and to Albert for lending us all of your expertise and your insights. Thank you. I'm sure you'll join me in saying thank you. Do you mind waiting there for 1 second?